everyone. I'm here to read the Module 4, The Qualities of Effective Assessment System. The last module looked at the steps that developers can take to embed continuous improvement within their assessment procedures. This module examines in more detail the qualities of a good system of assessment, the characteristic that users look for when choosing assessments or that educators look for when evaluating an assessment system. In other words, the characteristics that make the assessment useful. For qualities of useful assessments, we have the beneficial consequences, validity, reliability, practicality. The four elements represented in Figure 4.1 represent a broad consensus on the essential qualities that make up useful language assessment systems. I would not wish to downplay the importance of other qualities that have been proposed, such as authenticity or absence of bias, which are discussed in Module 7, but I would argue that they are responsibly well accounted for within this quality framework, presenting the four qualities in Figure 4.1 in the form of cone with present practicality at the base and beneficial consequences at the top is intended to convey something about the relationship between them. Practicality is found at the base because it is a necessary condition for all assessment. An impractical assessment will simply not survive for very long, whatever its other distinctions. Beneficial consequences that might flow from use of a language assessment are at the apex of the cone because they are the ultimate objective of any assessment system. These hope for consequences may include teaching and learning becoming more effective, opportunities opening up for language learners, and employers finding suitably qualified staff to carry out linguistically demanding tasks. Their position in Figure 4.1 reflects that they are supported by the other qualities. Beneficial consequences are not guaranteed by the presence of other three qualities, but are very unlikely to follow if an assessment system lacks practicality, reliability, and validity. Movement up the cone also represents increasing controversy. Judging the practicality of an assessment system is a relatively straightforward matter. Its validity and consequences will be much open to dispute. Practicality. Practicality was described by Bachman and Palmer 2010, page 262, as the difference between the resources that will required in the development and use of an assessment and the resources that will available for these activities. It is self-evident that an assessment that lacks resources will not be sustainable if there is not enough time, equipment, money, or expertise to operate an assessment. It may never be used and certainly will not survive in use for very long. In reality, assessment is always in competition for resources. In any language teaching organizations, informal assessment in the classroom has to compete for time and attention with other day-to-day activities, while at the more formal, summative end of the continuum, assessment has to compete for funding with libraries, computers, software, teacher salaries, and all the other essential requirements of a functioning school, college, or national education system. Where quality assessment is made a priority, resources can often be found to support it. Practicality can be thought about in terms of efficiency, the extent to which the commitment of resources to a system of assessment is justified by the benefits it brings. As in other areas of expenditure, assessment choices involve a complex balancing of benefits and costs. As we're put in, we have to be sure that the tasks we are using are the most efficient way of obtaining the information we need. Equally, it is important to ensure that all the activities involved in an assessment, including development, scoring, giving feedback, reporting results, and monitoring quality, are taken into account and that they are carried out as efficiently as possible. Educational managers need to weigh up the gains from investing an assessment against the other demands on their budgets. Teachers need to think about how much of the limited time they have with their students would be spent on assessment and how best to integrate and balance this with other activities. Assessment system cannot and should not continue to be used unless a compelling case can be made that the benefits of maintaining them outweigh the costs. It is not easy to find the right balance. Teachers may enthusi- enthusiastically take up new ideas only to find that they cannot keep up with the additional workload, or they may resist new forms of assessment because they worry that the new system might involve extra tasks that they cannot fit into their already busy schedules. Often managers underestimate the amount of time and the commitment of resources required to support good quality system and so fail to invest enough. Alternatively, they may overestimate the cost, conclude that they are prohibitive and fail to invest in all. Many assessments projects fail because planning only allows for the cost of development and not the substantial additional resources needed to keep the system going. It cannot be difficult to persuade managers and policy makers that it is not enough just to be seen to have a test or assessment in place, that it is vital that it should also be useful as a basis for making informed decisions about assessees. Making it useful will mean allowing for the ongoing cost involved in maintaining, supporting, and improving it. As with other areas of policy, good quality assessment often relies on energetic individuals who are prepared to argue for funding, demonstrate the value of good practice, criticize bad practice, and recognize what is and is not achievable in their working content. Table 4.1 suggests a list of illustrative practical issues that may constrain an assessment development and therefore need to be taken into account. These are organized in relation to the roles identified in Module 2. Judgments about how best to allocate resources usually bring with them disagreements and political controversies. In addition to what the calls resource constraints of the kind presented in Table 4.1, Book 2009 observed that there are often additional system constraints imposed by established working practices and cultural issues. In some places, performance is traditionally reported in terms of percentages, while in others, teachers tend to use letter grades. Certain approaches to assessment and certain items format are favored in some countries, but rejection in others. Multiple choice questions and standardized examinations are well established in Turkey, for example, but are seen as controversial in the Russian Federation, where assessment may teachers using performance assessments in the tradition. It will generally be less contentious to go along with the local expectations than to try to make different directions. Advances in computer technology have made some techniques, such as controlling and timing the delivery of assessments, more practical. They have opened up opportunities to capture more kinds of data, such as how long each assessee takes to respond to each item. However, Different software platforms also impose their own limitations. It will not be possible to deliver ideas for innovative task formats if the software lacks of functionality, and some techniques are actually easier to manage on paper. Problems with software or with the logistics of delivering material to large number of processes by computer have put an unexpected end to many otherwise promising projects. While it is not possible for any assessment to be reliable, valid, or beneficial if it is not sufficiently practical to get off the ground, it is quite possible to have practical assessment, one that is administratively manageable, that has very little to recommend it in terms of other qualities. In fact, such assessments are all too common. As Baker 1989, page 4, rather cynically expressed in relation to end-of-year examination, all that is necessary is that the exam be difficult or traumatic and have some vague relationship to the course the learners have followed. Very often in situations where assessments are used, no information is ever collected that would allow users to tell whether they have any of the qualities that might make them useful. It seems to be enough that students answer questions and that grades or scores are awarded even if nobody can explain what this might actually mean. Reliability. We use various tools every day to measure aspects of the world around us. Clocks to measure times, scales for weight, thermometers for temperature, and so on. When we use them, we want to know that we can interpret these tools consistently. If the time on your watch was sometimes at the same as the clocks on the wall and sometimes very different, or if your scales told you that 1 liter of water weighed 500 grams in the morning and 2 kilograms in the afternoon, you would reasonably conclude that they were faulty and would not trust what they told you. Of course, many of the tools we use every day are not very accurate, but they are good enough for our purposes. We generally get to meetings on time. We measure out ingredients and cook food at a suitable temperature. Much more precise tools are available, but there is trade-off between precision and cost. Accuracy is expensive. More people don't mind arriving a little early or late for a meeting and barely notice if the temperature in the room is 1 or 2 degrees warmer or cooler than is displayed on the thermometer. Measurements of time, temperature, or weight involve tangible quantities that most people do not find controversial. Language ability is a much more slippery and less certain concept. In most approachable to language assessment, it is assumed that language abilities represent a kind of mental trait or attribute similar to physical traits such, such as height or weight. We often describe people as having more or less language ability in rather the same way as we describe them as being tall or short. Anyone comparing fluent speakers with learners just beginning to grapple with a language may have little difficulty in accepting this idea. On the other hand, all language learners know that they are better at coping with some situations than others. Those who have studied a language as academic subjects to a high level often struggle to communicate when they first travel to a country where that language is spoken. Those who learn a language in the country become fluent through interactions with friends and neighbors, may have more difficulty with formal written language. In these circumstances, it is more difficult to judge who has the greater language ability. For these reasons, it may make more sense to conceive of many different kinds of language ability, depending on the social purpose for which of the language will be used. The development of assessments of language for business or for medical or academic or other specific purposes reflects this point of view. In case it is to be acknowledged that we are simply not in position to measure language abilities with the same precisions that we can achieve for weight or temperature. Even the very best language assessment cannot come close to the consistency and accuracy of watches or scales. It is inevitable that the estimation of language abilities will involve substantial uncertainty or measurement error. The best we can do is to estimate the impact of this upon the scores we obtain, and there are established statistical tools that allow us to do just that. Regrettably, users of assessment results often fail to understand the implication of measurement error. They often overlook or ignore it. If student A has scored 60 points on the language test and student B has scored 52, users may assume that this is concrete evidence that student scored 52 has a greater ability than student B. As is this section will illustrate, however, this is not necessarily a reasonable assumption at all. There are several potential sources of a measurement error, and each affects the degree of confidence we can place in the accuracy of results. These sources of error include measurement using different tools, measurement on different occasions, measurement of different groups of assessees, and measurement by different individuals. If they have reasonable estimates of the amount of error and understand how to interpret this information, users can gain a sense of how accurate scores and grades might be as indications of the assessee's abilities. With this information, they can only guess. Measurement using different tools, consistency, just as some type of measures or skills are more accurate than others. There can be little doubt that language assessment can be also more or less accurate. Also, unlike tape measures, assessments are usually more accurate along a certain limited stretch of the range of ability than at points above or below this. It is as though a tape measure could gauge distance between 40 and 60 centimeters quite precisely, but could only provide fuzzy estimates of about 25 centimeter or 30 centimeter or at least 80 centimeter for distances outside this range. A complicating factor is that we have no dependable yardsticks to help us judge just how accurate our language assessments are. If our watches show different times, we can check them against a world clock on the internet. If our weighing scales disagree, we can use a standard weight to check which is accurate. Sadly, there is no generally accepted gold standard measure of language ability. When they measure exactly the same qualities, we can translate results between different measurement scales by applying a simple calculation: kilograms to pounds in weight, Fahrenheit to Celsius on temperature. In contrast to weight or temperature, the concept of language ability itself is understood in rather different ways by individual teachers or test developers. According to their beliefs and intentions, teachers may use different assessment methods in different combinations to measure abilities and arrive at grades. Translating from one perspective to another may not always be possible, and this causes obvious difficulties for the users of assessment results. Content sampling. Even where two assessments are intended to measure the same knowledge, skills or abilities are built to exactly the same specifications and are administered to the same people at the same time. In other words, where two forms of the same assessments are combined, there will be differences in the result. This is because each form can only deal with a very limited selection of the language to be assessed, and it is matter of chance how far the sample that is chosen matches each learner's limited knowledge. To illustrate sampling issues, let's say a teacher gives Class a group of 20 students, an informal test or quiz based on 1,000 words they are supposed to have learned. To check whether the students know the words, leaving aside the tricky questions of what it actually means to know a word. He could give them a quiz made up of 1,000 questions. 1 point is available for each correct response. If all the students perform to the best of their ability and manage to stay awake, this quiz would show the teacher exactly which of the words each student knows, but it would also take too much time and mindful of the need for practicality and efficiency. He might decide that a quick 10 items quiz based on a random selection of the words should be enough to tell him which students know now know most of the words and which do not. In fact, although the teacher doesn't know this, each student has learned a random selection of exactly half of the words. In this scenario, taking the quiz is rather like asking each student in the class to flip a coin 10 times, as each student effectively has a 50% chance of knowing each of the words on the quiz. As all the students know 50% of the words, you might expect most of them to get 5 questions right out of the 10. But if you flip your coin 10 times, it's not particularly likely that you got 5 heads. Only about 25% or 1 in 4 people get this result. Most people will find they get 4, 5, or 6 heads. So, for most of Class A, the scores of 4, 5, or 6 do roughly reflect that they know about half of the words. According to the laws of probabil- probability, however, there is a good chance that one or two students might score 7 points and one or two might score 3 points. There is also a good chance that at least one could be very lucky. In sample of words on the quiz, there is about a 40% chance that a student who knows just 500 of the 1,000 words would actually score 8 out of 10, and a similar chance that one would score 2 out of 10. It wouldn't be astonishing if one scored 10 or 0. Now let's imagine the teacher gives the same quiz to a second group of 20 students, Class B, but in this group, each student only knows 250 of words based on the probability. Each student in this class a roughly a 25% chance of success on each question, so we should expect just over half to score either 2 or 3. On the other hand, we could expect 4 or 5 students to get a score at least 4 out of 10, and there is fair chance that one student may be able to score 6 or more. If the teacher decides to recognize his classes on the basis of this quiz, placing those scoring 3 or below into a lower level and those scoring 4 or above into a higher level class. We would we would expect to see around 7 of the 40 students going into the wrong class, even if we increase the distance in the probability of success in the different groups. Let's say that in Class A plus students all know 750 words, there are still likely to be learners in Class B who will perform at least as well on the quiz as the lowest scorer in Class A plus simply because of the choice of words on the quiz. Happily for the teacher, there are ways to improve reliability. One is to increase the number of questions. Of course, 1,000 questions would make the picture very clear, but even 100 questions would be enough to minimize the possibility that members of Class A might be confused with members of Class B. It is unlikely that anybody in Class A would score less or that anybody in Class B would score more than 35 out of 100. On the other hand, taking a representative sample of the full range of language ability is usually a much more complex propositions than the one facing this teacher. Even when every effort is made to maximize quality, precision is very difficult, time consuming, and costly to achieve. Measurement on different occasions. Stability. A problem when trying to measure people's physical characteristics like height, weight, and foot size in that this can fluctuate significantly by late evening. People may be as much as 2 centimeters shorter than when they wake up in the morning. Mental abilities also fluctuate, being affected by the time of day and physical conditions. Performance on tasks of all kinds of affected by alertness, health, and mood. This means that even if were able to administer identical and perfectly accurate language assessment on different occasions, we would still see differences in the learners' scores on each occasions. And it's not only people's abilities that change over time. If we don't very carefully control and the condition on each occasions that we administer an assessment, the experience may be very inconsistent. Uncomfortable heat and traffic noise might make the afternoon's listening test sessions more difficult than the mornings when it was cool and quiet. If the teacher of Class K allows her students 10 minutes longer to complete their writing assignments than was allowed by students in Class J, they may produce better work even though they have the same level of ability in writing. Holding conditions constant can help to make results more reliable, but it can also be very limiting. Using only strictly controlled tasks for assessment in class can rule out the use of more creative, unpredictable task types and restrict the role of teachers to that of an invigilator, prevented from taking formative opportunities to investigate students' difficulties to help them learn from and improve on their performance. In reality, when tasks are used by teachers, there will inevitably be a good deal of variability in conditions. Balancing the negative effects on reliability from these variations over the course of few weeks or months, teachers generally have numerous chances to observe what students can do. This means that they gather far more evidence of students' abilities than would be available from most tests. It has been argued that his broad sample of unassessed abilities may upset the limited reliability of the individual assessment tasks made by teachers. Black and William 2006. Measurement of different individuals' test taker characteristics. Differences in performance over time are closely related to personal attributes of assessees, what Bachman and Palmer 2010 called assessee characteristic. These were divided by Sullivan and Green 2011 into three categories: physical, physiological, psychological, and experiential. Physiological characteristics include, along with short-term illness, and endures longer-term disabilities that might impact upon test performance, such as poor eyesight causing difficulties in reading the test materials, and stable biological characteristics such as gender. Psychological characteristics also include relatively short-term issues such as concentration and mood, together with more stable characteristics such as personality type. These characteristics can play a major part in performance on assessments. For example, some individuals suffer from such debilitating anxiety when taking tests that may be unable to participate with, while others seem to respond very positively to test conditions. Every effort should be made to put assessees at their ease so that they are all be able to perform to the best of their ability.